She thought the hardest part was over. The dress was perfect, the vows were spoken, and the ring was finally on her finger. But as Sarah Mitchell stood outside the church reception hall that warm September evening in 2019, watching her new husband laugh with his groomsmen, she had no idea that in less than 3 hours her entire world would shatter in front of everyone she loved. The man who married them, the priest they trusted, was about to say something so shocking, so vicious, that the whole town would be talking about it for months to come. And the worst part? No one would believe her side of the story, not at first. This is what happened when a wedding turned into a nightmare, and a bride had to fight not just for her reputation, but for her sanity. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What could make a priest storm into a wedding reception and publicly accuse a bride of manipulation just hours after marrying her? Was Sarah hiding something the whole town needed to know? Or was the man in the collar hiding something far worse? By the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones we're taught never to question. Stay with me, because what happened next will make you reconsider everything you thought you knew about trust, authority, and the courage it takes to speak truth to power. Sarah Mitchell was 26 years old when she met James Cooper at a community fundraiser in the small Illinois town of Riverside. She taught second grade at Lincoln Elementary School, spent her weekends volunteering at the animal shelter, and dreamed of the kind of love her parents had shared before her father passed away when she was 17. James was a physical therapist at the regional hospital, quiet and kind, with gentle hands and a smile that made her feel safe. They dated for 2 years, during which he proved himself to be exactly what he seemed, patient, thoughtful, always showing up when he said he would. When he proposed on the shore of Lake Michigan at sunset, Sarah cried so hard she could barely say yes. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. Her mother, Linda, was thrilled. She'd worried about Sarah being alone after her father's death, carrying too much weight on her shoulders, always taking care of others, but rarely letting anyone take care of her. James seemed like the answer to prayers Linda hadn't even spoken out loud. The wedding was set for September 14th, just over a year after the proposal, at St. Anthony's Church, the same place where Sarah had been baptized, where her father's funeral had been held, where she'd taken her first communion. It felt right. It felt like home. Father Gregory Brennan was the priest at St. Anthony's. He'd been there for 12 years, well-loved and respected in the community, known for his passionate sermons and his involvement in local outreach programs. He was 51 years old, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. People called him charismatic. Sarah's mother called him a blessing. When Sarah and James approached him about officiating their wedding, Father Brennan seemed genuinely delighted. He insisted on meeting with them for premarital counseling, 6 sessions over 3 months, which he said would help them build a strong foundation. Sarah appreciated his thoroughness. James, less religious but supportive, went along without complaint. The first few sessions were normal, discussions about communication, finances, conflict resolution, the kinds of topics you'd expect. But somewhere around the 4th session, things started to feel different. Father Brennan began asking Sarah to stay after James left, just for a few minutes, he said, to discuss some spiritual concerns he had about her readiness for marriage. At first, it seemed innocent enough. He asked about her prayer life, whether she felt truly called to this union, whether she'd confessed all her sins. Sarah, earnest and eager to do things right, answered honestly. She admitted she sometimes struggled with doubt, not about James, but about whether she was good enough, whether she deserved happiness after losing her father. Father Brennan listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. Then he said something that made her stomach twist. He said he'd been praying for her specifically, that God had put her on his heart in a special way, that he felt a deep spiritual connection to her that went beyond the usual pastor and parishioner relationship. Sarah didn't know what to say. She felt uncomfortable but also confused. Was this normal? Was she overreacting? Father Brennan was a priest. He'd devoted his life to God. Surely he meant it in a purely spiritual sense. She told herself she was being paranoid and tried to push the unease aside. But then, 2 weeks before the wedding, Father Brennan called her personal cell phone late one evening. It was nearly 10 o'clock. Sarah was already in bed, scrolling through last-minute wedding details on her laptop. When she saw his name on the screen, her heart started pounding before she even answered. His voice was soft, almost intimate. He said he'd been unable to sleep, that he kept thinking about their last conversation, that he wanted to make sure she knew how special she was, not just as a bride, but as a woman. He said he dreamed about her sometimes. Sarah's mouth went dry. She stammered something about needing to go, that James was calling her, which was a lie. Father Brennan paused, then said he understood, but that she could call him any time, day or night, if she ever needed to talk privately. When Sarah hung up, her hands were shaking. She sat there in the dark for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Part of her wanted to tell James immediately, but another part of her, the part that had been raised to respect authority and never question church leaders, told her she must be misunderstanding. Maybe Father Brennan was just overly compassionate. Maybe she was reading too much into it. She decided not to say anything, at least not yet. She didn't want to create drama so close to the wedding. She didn't want to seem like she was causing trouble over nothing. So she stayed quiet, and that silence would turn out to be one of the biggest mistakes of her life. The wedding day arrived, bright and beautiful. The church was decorated with white roses and soft candlelight. Sarah's mother cried as she helped her daughter into the dress, a simple but elegant gown with lace sleeves and a long train. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror and felt a flutter of joy mixed with lingering anxiety. She told herself that once the ceremony was over, once she and James were officially married, everything would be fine. Father Brennan would go back to being just her priest, and that uncomfortable phone call would fade into a strange memory she could eventually forget. The ceremony began at 4 p.m. Sarah walked down the aisle on her mother's arm, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nerves. James stood at the altar, tears already streaming down his face, and when she reached him, he whispered, "You're so beautiful." For a moment, everything felt perfect. Father Brennan began the ceremony with his usual eloquence, his voice carrying through the church with practiced ease. But as he spoke, Sarah noticed something in his eyes when he looked at her, something intense and unsettling that made her want to look away. During the exchange of vows, when it came time for Sarah to speak, Father Brennan reached out and placed his hand over hers, holding it just a beat too long. She felt James tense beside her. The congregation murmured, assuming it was just part of the ceremony. But Sarah knew better. Her stomach dropped. After James slid the ring onto her finger, Father Brennan announced them as husband and wife, his voice catching slightly on the word wife as his gaze remained fixed on Sarah. The kiss was brief, the applause thunderous, and then it was over. Or so everyone thought. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, just a 5-minute walk from the sanctuary. The room was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of catered food. Sarah tried to relax, tried to lose herself in the joy of the moment as friends and family congratulated her and James. Her mother was radiant, dancing with James's father. Her best friend Claire pulled her aside and whispered, "You did it, girl. You're actually married." Sarah smiled, but the knot in her stomach hadn't loosened. About 2 hours into the reception, just as they were about to cut the cake, the hall doors burst open. Father Brennan stood in the doorway, and immediately Sarah knew something was terribly wrong. His face was flushed, his eyes wild. Several people gasped. He wasn't supposed to be there. Typically, priests officiated the ceremony and then left the reception to the family. But there he was, striding toward the center of the room with an urgency that made everyone fall silent. James stood up from the head table, confusion written all over his face. Sarah's mother clutched her chest, fear flickering in her eyes. Father Brennan reached the microphone before anyone could stop him. His voice, amplified through the speakers, boomed across the room. "I need to say something. I need everyone here to know the truth about what's been happening." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. Claire grabbed her arm, whispering, "What is he talking about?" Father Brennan continued, his words slurring slightly, and Sarah realized with horror that he was drunk. "This woman," he pointed directly at Sarah, "has been leading me on for months. She's been calling me, texting me, telling me she has feelings for me. She's been using me, manipulating me, and now she's standing here pretending to be an innocent bride." The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, the sound of chairs scraping as people jumped to their feet. James turned to Sarah, his face a mask of shock and confusion. "Sarah, what is he talking about?" Sarah couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up entirely. Tears streamed down her face, but no words came out. Father Brennan kept going, his voice rising with each sentence. "I have proof. I have the messages she sent me, the late-night calls, the confessions of doubt about this marriage. She told me she wasn't sure about James, that she felt a connection to me she couldn't explain. I tried to counsel her, to guide her back to the right path, but she wouldn't stop. And now she's made a mockery of this sacred institution in front of all of you." He pulled out his phone, holding it up like a piece of evidence. "It's all here, every manipulative word, every lie." Sarah's mother stood up, her voice trembling with fury. "How dare you come in here and accuse my daughter of something so vile? Get out of this church right now." But Father Brennan didn't move. He looked at Sarah with an expression that was equal parts hurt and rage. "Tell them, Sarah. Tell them the truth. Tell them how you begged me not to reveal your secret, how you promised you'd end things with James if I just kept quiet." James turned to Sarah again, and this time there was doubt in his eyes. That doubt felt like a knife to her heart. She finally found her voice, shaking and desperate. "That's not true. None of that is true. He's lying. He's been inappropriate with me, and I didn't know how to tell anyone." But the damage was done. The guests were whispering, pointing, pulling out their phones to record the chaos. Some looked at Sarah with pity, others with suspicion. Within minutes, the reception had dissolved into complete pandemonium. James's mother ushered him out a side door, away from the spectacle. Claire tried to pull Sarah away, but reporters from the local paper had already arrived, drawn by the commotion, and they were snapping photos, shouting questions. Father Brennan finally left, stumbling slightly as he walked out the door, leaving behind a room full of shattered people and a bride whose perfect day had become a living nightmare. Now let me ask you something. If you were at that reception, who would you have believed in that moment? The respected priest who'd served the community for over a decade, or the young bride trying to defend herself against his accusations? It's easy to say you'd believe the victim, but be honest with yourself. In that moment, with a man of God standing there with apparent evidence, would you really have questioned him? This is the power dynamic that predators like Father Brennan exploit, and it's exactly why Sarah's fight for the truth was about to become the hardest battle of her life. The next 72 hours were a blur of horror for Sarah. By Sunday morning, the story had spread across the entire town. The headline in the Riverside Gazette read, "Local priest accuses bride of manipulation on wedding day." Social media exploded with opinions, most of them brutal. People who'd known Sarah her whole life suddenly questioned her character. Comments ranged from, "I always thought there was something off about her," to, "Poor Father Brennan, being seduced by a temptress." The church community rallied around Father Brennan. He'd been with them for over a decade, had baptized their children, buried their loved ones, been there in their darkest hours. Sarah was just a young woman they saw on Sundays. Who were they going to believe? James stayed at his brother's house that first night, refusing to answer Sarah's calls. When he finally agreed to meet her on Monday afternoon, his eyes were red from crying. He sat across from her in a coffee shop, his hands wrapped around a cup he didn't drink from, and said, I need you to be completely honest with me. Did anything happen between you and Father Brennan?" Sarah felt something inside her break. The fact that he even had to ask, the fact that he doubted her after 2 years together, made her realize how deep the damage went. She told him everything, the uncomfortable counseling sessions, the late-night phone call, the way Father Brennan had looked at her during the ceremony. She showed him her phone records, proving she hadn't called him except for the initial scheduling of the counseling sessions. James listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want to believe you, Sarah. I really do. But everyone is saying, I just need time to think." Time to think. Those 4 words felt like a death sentence. Sarah left the coffee shop feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life. Her mother tried to fight back immediately, marching to the church to demand a meeting with the parish council. But the council members, all longtime friends of Father Brennan, were cool and dismissive. They said they'd look into the matter, but their tone made it clear they'd already decided where their loyalties lay. One council member, an older woman named Margaret, even suggested that perhaps Sarah had misinterpreted Father Brennan's pastoral care as something more, given her emotional state after losing her father. That comment sent Sarah's mother over the edge. She started shouting, demanding they listen, but they simply escorted her out of the building. Sarah stopped going to work. She couldn't face the stares, the whispers in the teacher's lounge, the parents who suddenly looked at her with suspicion when they dropped their kids off. Her principal, a kind woman named Mrs. Henderson, called to check on her and gently suggested she take a leave of absence until things settled down. Sarah knew what that meant. They wanted her gone. By the end of the week, Sarah had lost her job, her husband was still living with his brother and barely speaking to her, and half the town believed she was a manipulative seductress who'd tried to ruin a priest's life. She spent most of her days in her childhood bedroom at her mother's house, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. Claire came by every day, bringing food Sarah didn't eat and offering comfort Sarah couldn't accept. "You have to fight back," Claire kept saying. "You have to make people see the truth." But how? How do you fight a man in a collar? A man with decades of trust built up? A man who controlled the narrative before you even had a chance to speak? Sarah felt powerless, drowning in shame and despair, questioning whether anyone would ever believe her. Think about that for a moment. Imagine losing everything in one night. Your reputation, your job, your marriage, all because you tried to tell the truth about someone everyone else trusted. How long would you have lasted before giving up? Would you have had the strength to keep fighting when the entire world seemed against you? Sarah was about to find out she wasn't as alone as she thought. Then, 3 weeks after the wedding, something shifted. Sarah was lying in bed at 2 in the afternoon, still in her pajamas, when Claire burst into her room without knocking. She was holding her laptop, her eyes wild with excitement. "You need to see this, right now." Claire set the laptop on the bed and pressed play on a video. It was a woman, maybe a few years older than Sarah, sitting in front of a camera with tears streaming down her face. "My name is Rachel, and I need to tell you what Father Gregory Brennan did to me 5 years ago when I was going through marriage counseling with my then fiancé." Sarah's heart stopped. She sat up slowly, her eyes glued to the screen. Rachel's story was almost identical to Sarah's. The private meetings after counseling sessions, the inappropriate comments, the late-night phone calls. But Rachel's story went further. She described how Father Brennan had convinced her that her fiancé wasn't the right man for her, that God had brought them together for a different purpose, and how he'd eventually cornered her in his office and tried to kiss her. Rachel had been so horrified, so confused, that she'd called off her wedding and left town entirely, too ashamed to tell anyone what had really happened. She'd only come forward now because she'd seen Sarah's story in the news and couldn't stay silent anymore. "If this is happening to another woman, I have to speak up. I should have spoken up years ago. Father Brennan is not the holy man everyone thinks he is. He's a predator." The video ended, and Sarah looked at Claire with tears streaming down her face. "There's more," Claire said quietly. "Since Rachel posted this 2 days ago, 3 other women have come forward, all with similar stories, all from the past decade. He's been doing this for years, Sarah. You're not the only one. You were never the only one." That night, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to let Father Brennan destroy her life without a fight. With Claire's help, she reached out to Rachel and the other women. They decided to meet, to share their stories, to figure out how to bring the truth to light. The meeting took place at Claire's apartment the following Saturday. 5 women, ranging in age from 24 to 35, all with eerily similar experiences. There was Rachel, who'd left town 5 years ago. There was Monica, who'd been a youth volunteer at the church and had endured months of inappropriate touches and comments before finally quitting. There was Beth, whose marriage had nearly fallen apart after Father Brennan told her husband she'd confessed to having doubts about their relationship, something she'd never said. And there was Jennifer, the youngest, who'd been 19 when Father Brennan had called her into his office to discuss her spiritual gifts and ended up telling her she was beautiful in a way that made her skin crawl. As they shared their stories, a pattern emerged. Father Brennan targeted women who were vulnerable, going through transitions, dealing with loss or uncertainty. He used his position of authority to manipulate and gaslight them, and when they tried to resist or pull away, he turned the congregation against them, painting them as troubled, unstable, or seductive. It was a calculated, methodical pattern of abuse that had been going on for at least a decade, maybe longer. The women cried together, raged together, and then made a plan. They would go public, not just with their individual stories, but as a united front. They would contact the local news, the diocesan bishop, anyone who would listen. They would not be silenced. The following Monday, they held a press conference in the parking lot of St. Anthony's Church. Sarah stood at the center, flanked by the 4 other women, with Claire and Sarah's mother standing supportively behind them. A dozen reporters showed up, cameras rolling. Sarah read from a prepared statement, her voice shaking but strong. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 3 weeks ago, Father Gregory Brennan publicly humiliated me at my wedding reception, accusing me of manipulating him and leading him on. Those accusations were lies. The truth is that Father Brennan has been harassing me for months, making inappropriate comments, calling me late at night, and using his position of power to make me feel trapped and afraid. I stayed silent because I didn't think anyone would believe me. But I'm not alone. I stand here with 4 other women who have experienced the same manipulation, the same abuse of power, from the same man. We are here today to tell the truth and to demand accountability." Rachel spoke next, then Monica, then Beth, then Jennifer. Each woman's testimony was powerful, raw, and heartbreaking. By the end, several of the reporters were visibly moved. The story aired that evening on 3 local news stations and was picked up by the regional papers by the next morning. The headline this time read, "5 women accuse priest of harassment and abuse of power." Public opinion began to shift slowly, reluctantly, but it shifted. People who'd been quick to judge Sarah started to question their assumptions. How could 5 different women have nearly identical stories unless there was truth to them? The parish council could no longer ignore the allegations. They were forced to launch an official investigation, and Father Brennan was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. For James, the turning point came when he read Rachel's account in the paper. He called Sarah that afternoon, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I should have believed you from the start. I should have trusted you. I was just so confused, and everyone was saying—" Sarah cut him off gently. "I know. I understand. But I needed you to believe me, James. Even when it was hard, even when everyone else doubted me, I needed you in my corner." James was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Can I come home? Can we try to figure this out together?" Sarah thought about it. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to take him back and pretend the last few weeks hadn't happened. But another part of her, the part that had been forced to grow strong and fight for herself, knew it wasn't that simple. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I need to see that you really understand what happened, that you won't doubt me the next time things get hard. I need to know you'll stand with me, not just when it's easy, but when the whole world is against us." James promised he would prove it to her, and over the coming weeks, he tried. He showed up to every meeting with investigators. He held Sarah's hand through panic attacks and sleepless nights. He publicly defended her to anyone who would listen, even when it cost him friendships. Slowly, painfully, they began to rebuild what had been broken. The diocesan investigation took 4 months, during which time more women came forward, not just from Riverside, but from Father Brennan's previous parishes in other parts of Illinois. By the time the final report was released, 11 women had shared their stories. The report concluded that Father Brennan had engaged in a pattern of inappropriate conduct, emotional manipulation, and abuse of pastoral authority over a period of at least 15 years. He was permanently removed from ministry, his priesthood revoked. He was not, however, criminally charged, as most of the incidents fell outside the statute of limitations, and the nature of the abuse was psychological and emotional rather than physical. For many of the women, including Sarah, this felt like an incomplete victory. They'd been heard, believed, and vindicated, but there was no real legal justice, no consequence that matched the harm he'd caused. Father Brennan left Riverside quietly, moving to another state where no one knew his name, but the damage he'd done lingered. Sarah and James spent the next year in intensive couples therapy, working through the trauma and betrayal. It wasn't easy. There were days when Sarah wondered if they'd ever truly recover, if the foundation of trust could ever be fully rebuilt. But James kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept proving that he was committed not just to the idea of their marriage, but to Sarah herself. And slowly, they found their way back to each other. 2 years after the wedding that never was, Sarah and James decided to renew their vows. This time, it was a small ceremony on a beach in Michigan, just the two of them, Claire, Sarah's mother, and James's parents. There was no priest, no church, no crowd of witnesses, just the two of them, speaking promises they'd written themselves, promises forged in fire and pain, and ultimately in hope. As Sarah looked into James's eyes and said, "I choose you, even after everything, especially after everything," she felt something shift inside her. She'd spent so long feeling like a victim, like someone to whom terrible things had happened. But standing there on that beach, with the waves crashing behind them and the sun setting in front of them, she realized she was more than that. She was a survivor. She was a fighter. She was a woman who'd faced down one of the most powerful forces in her community and won. The beach ceremony wasn't the fairy tale wedding she'd dreamed of as a little girl. It was better. It was real. Today, Sarah and James live in a quiet neighborhood in suburban Chicago. They have a 3-year-old daughter named Emma and another baby on the way. Sarah still teaches, though she took a few years off after Emma was born. She also runs a support group for women who've experienced religious trauma, meeting once a month in a community center. The group has grown from just the original 5 women to over 30 members. James works at the same hospital and volunteers with a local organization that provides therapy services to abuse survivors. Together, they've built a life that feels solid, real, and earned. But Sarah will tell you, if you ask, that she's not the same person she was on that September day in 2019 when she walked down the aisle in a white dress full of hope and innocence. That version of Sarah died in the wreckage of that wedding reception. The woman who emerged from the ashes is harder, wiser, and infinitely stronger. She knows now that authority doesn't equal goodness, that institutions can be as flawed and broken as the people who run them, and that sometimes the only person you can truly count on is yourself. She also knows that healing isn't linear, that trauma leaves scars even after the wounds have closed, and that there are still nights when she wakes up in a cold sweat, replaying Father Brennan's words in her head. But those nights are getting fewer, and on the hard days, she looks at her daughter's face at James sleeping beside her, at the life they've rebuilt together, and she knows it was worth it. Every painful moment, every public humiliation, every sleepless night. It was all worth it because she refused to let one man's evil define her story. So let me ask you, what would you have done in Sarah's situation? Would you have fought back immediately, or would you have stayed silent to avoid the drama? Do you think James should have believed Sarah from the start, or was his doubt understandable given the circumstances? And what do you think should happen to religious leaders who abuse their power like Father Brennan did? Should they face criminal charges, or is removal from ministry enough? These are hard questions without easy answers, but they're questions we need to keep asking because stories like Sarah's happen more often than we want to admit. They happen in churches, in schools, in workplaces, anywhere power dynamics exist, and people are afraid to speak up. The difference is whether we choose to listen when victims find the courage to come forward. So if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of someone in your own life who needs to hear this message, please share it. Because the more we talk about these issues, the more we shine light into the dark corners where predators hide, the harder it becomes for them to operate. And if you've experienced something similar, please know that Sarah's story is proof that you can make it through. It won't be easy, it will hurt, but you are stronger than you know, and you deserve justice, healing, and peace. Thank you for watching. If you found this story powerful, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more real stories about real people overcoming impossible odds. And remember, your voice matters. Your truth matters. Never let anyone make you believe otherwise.